Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. John Rossman helped transform Amazon.com's entire business. As you'll hear in this episode, after the dot-com bubble burst, Amazon delved into a new business line that allowed third parties to do business off of Amazon's platform and to make use of Amazon's many competencies. This is now extremely lucrative for Amazon, and in some cases more lucrative than Amazon just selling you something itself. In this episode, John describes his role in developing the Amazon third-party marketplace and also gives us his perspective on what makes Amazon successful. If you want to go deeper into Amazon as a company, you're in luck, because as we discuss, John has written a book about Amazon called The Amazon Way, 14 leadership lessons behind the world's most disruptive company. There's a link to buy the book in the show notes. And if you want to understand Amazon on a deeper level, I highly encourage you to check it out. John Rossman, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me so much.
I always like to start off with a little bit of background. So it looks like the first half of your career was pretty varied, but generally you were working as a consultant for people like Accenture, Arthur Andersen, that sort of thing?
That's right. Absolutely.
So did that give you exposure and experience with lots of different industries and markets?
I did. I worked in manufacturing. I worked in a lot of gas and utility companies. I did a bunch of insurance work. But the thing that's always held my interest has been integration, whether that's been, process integration, data integration, systems integration. That's been, and running kind of complex technology-driven change. So those have been the things that have been common throughout my entire career.
So was Commerce Route, was that your first sort of tech company that you worked with, or tech project that you worked on?
That was, yeah, exactly. So Commerce Route was a startup company, started in 99, 98, something like that. And I joined in early 2000 to run professional services for them. And it was the founders were ex-Microsoft guys, and we built a workflow engine and a easy interface to be able to integrate disparate data sources between each other. And what we eventually ended up doing was putting all this technology onto an appliance that you could simply plug into a stack of servers, and everything was managed through a web browser, which was pretty creative in 2000, 2001 to do that. And we had a lot of fun doing it. I think we hit the market a little late and a little bad timing relative to the capital markets and IT spending. But that was a lot of fun. I basically drove kind of clients and solutions for Commerce Route.
So because I'm interested in how this maybe led you towards Amazon, were these tools that allowed people to do e-commerce and things like that?
Either e-commerce or
B2B.
Just B2B, and sometimes just internal app-to-app integration. And so a lot of the use cases were EDI and flat file and some early XML scenarios, and business partner flow and change. We did quite a bit of work with a high-tech industry standard called RosettaNet, and built a RosettaNet kind of library that made it relative. The whole goal was to be able to lower what the cost of what it took to do an integration. So dramatically lower the cost of doing integration was the goal. And so it allowed kind of a business analyst, a tech-savvy business analyst, to be able to do their own lightweight integrations.
So what leads you to Amazon? I think I read that a couple friends maybe suggested that you apply to Amazon.
Yeah, so a guy by the name of Jason Child had been a colleague of mine at Arthur Andersen. He had been an audit manager at Arthur Andersen. I was in the consulting practice. We worked together on a couple of clients, and I was out of the Portland practice for Arthur Andersen. I moved to Seattle for Commerce Route. Jason was in Seattle, and as it became apparent kind of what the outcome was going to be for Commerce Route, and I started thinking ahead, I kept in touch with Jason, and he was the one who was like, oh, we've got something pretty interesting that we're thinking about that could take good advantage of, your background. And so I started talking to Amazon about what became the merchant set, or the third-party business.
So this is April of 2002. I read in your book that the interview process was fairly intensive. You want to share the story of what that's like to get hired at Amazon?
Well, I don't think everybody's path is like mine and everything. And so I started, I guess I joined in the April timeframe in 2002. I started talking with them several months before. I think I did something like 23 different interviews. And what was really cool was I was really helping to build the strategy for what became the Merchants App program kind of through those interviews. And by the end of it, I kind of knew more of the disparate pieces and where we were at starting out than I think anybody else did at Amazon. And so that was my interviewing process, was really a strategy development process.
Before we do get into what you do, the Merchants App program. But again, this is 2002. So this is after the bubbles burst. This is maybe not too long after Amazon maybe flirts with going under. So I'm curious, what was the mood of the company when you joined it?
Well, I think the best way to describe it was literally the mantra of like the headcount planning was, we are keeping headcount flat. And so I remember having to, convince and argue to get a couple of people allocated for account management for, what was kind of the big bet for the enterprise. And the discussion was, well, if we, give you two people, where's that headcount going to come from? Because we are keeping headcount flat. Versus, today it's just hiring by the hundreds at Amazon, right? And so it was a very headcount and cost conscientious environment at Amazon. But I think that they truly were kind of through, the worst of it, and the stock had recovered a little bit at that point. And the model was proving out, and we were kind of getting on to the next big thing, which was this third-party selling strategy.
Right. So as you've described, you're brought on to launch what's called Merchants App, but you're also sort of formulating it. You're sort of selling yourself into this program and selling the program as well. So describe what Merchants App was designed to do and the origins of this idea.
Yeah, so Amazon had a couple of other previous attempts at allowing third parties to sell to customers. They had attempted an auctions business, which you've discussed at length, and they also had a business called Z Shops, and they had allowed for used books to be sold at Amazon. But all of them had significant limitations, both customer experience limitations as well as kind of selling tool limitations. For example, for the Z Shops, it was a separate checkout pipeline for a customer. So if you were buying something from Z Shops and also buying something from Amazon, you actually had to check out twice. And sellers had very limited ability to create new detail pages. They had very limited promotional capability. And so the vision that we had was that, we wanted to give third-party sellers essentially the same tools and the same capabilities as Amazon, the retailer, had. And also at that point, I think the key strategic move was at that point, Amazon was selling in books, music, and video. And we were using this third-party selling strategy as a way to rapidly expand the number of categories that Amazon was going to sell at the website. And at that point, we positioned it as, Amazon would be simply the marketplace maker and owner, and we wouldn't go into these categories. But obviously, over time, Amazon has aggressively gone into being a retailer in these categories, as well as actually a brand maker in a lot of these categories.
So initially, it's sort of a quick and dirty way to expand beyond music and movies and books into things like, I don't know, sporting goods, health and beauty, apparel, that sort of thing?
That's exactly right. The first one we started off with was apparel. Then we went into sporting goods. Then we went into health. And then I think we launched, 14 categories over 2 years.
So you're working with these individual brands and these individual retailers, and then you're offering them not only your sales platform, but also use of your fulfillment centers and your warehouses, or not? What do you launch these? What do you offer the partners?
For the first few years, what we're offering customers is access to customers and leveraging the Amazon customer base to sell their products directly to. The FBA, or Fulfillment by Amazon, capability came up a couple of years later. So it kind of we launched MerchantSat in late 2002. Then Prime launched sometime, I want to say, in 2003 or 2004. And then the FBA program started in, I would guess, 2005. And all of it took a few years before it really gathered steam. But I think it really was those three together, MerchantSat, Prime, and FBA. Those three together are what really drove the juggernaut of what today is the third-party business.
So often when I've read about Amazon's third-party platform, that it's always described as, well, they had the infrastructure anyway, they had the warehouses, so why not make use of this? But you're saying that at least at the very beginning, the merchants they're still using their own systems. They're simply getting access to Amazon customers.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, there was no ability to, other than Toys R Us, nobody else had access to leveraging Amazon's fulfillment centers and fulfillment capabilities.
Was Toys R Us the first?
As far as I know,
okay.
Toys R Us was the first. That's right.
But then you expand to things like Target and Sears and Marks and Spencer and things like that.
As well as hundreds of thousands of other third parties being able to leverage Amazon's fulfillment capabilities.
Okay, well let's get into that. The fact that it can be basically anybody. So you had to come up with essentially an automated process if this is going to work, if you're going to have thousands and then millions of partners in this program. So were you involved in setting up that whole system?
Well, for the MerchantSat platform, I absolutely was. I was really kind of the owner of that. And selling at Amazon was very different than selling at eBay, right? eBay at this time was the absolute marketplace leader. But, selling there and the customer experience was pretty much like a flea market, right? Like if you went and searched for a Canon SuperShot S40 camera, there could be 10 to 20 different pages of listings. And as a customer, you would have to figure out, well, exactly what's the difference? What am I getting on each one? At Amazon, one of the concepts we had was that we wanted this concept called item authority. And item authority was the notion that regardless of who's selling it, there is one thing to be defined, right? There is a SKU to be defined. And so it was our job to reconcile all these different parties who might be contributing or trying to establish the item, reconcile it down to one item, and then let other people make offers against it so multiple people could sell it. And that was both a very different customer experience, but it also had a very different seller obligation and complexity in order to be able to sell at Amazon. And
right.
That's just one example of kind of how we made integration very different at Amazon.
Well, and that points to you're also providing for these partners lots of sales data, because if they're gonna have to compete in this one channel on things like price, then they have to be able to know how the market is behaving, know how customers are behaving. So you're also creating systems to give them that sort of data as well.
Well, really, only just on their own sales. Now,
Okay.
There are some third-party tools available now that help give indicators of the competitive nature and the velocity of items being sold at Amazon to help you both do selection planning and pricing and things like that. But Amazon's never given more than just the data that belongs to you to third-party sellers.
Interesting. So you mentioned eBay, and so I think it's striking because I don't know if you heard the chapters on eBay, but when eBay first comes around, Amazon seemingly is fearful that maybe eBay has a better model. But what you were able to do essentially is prove that wrong and basically overcome eBay by proving that your method for third-party sales ends up being superior for the customer and thus probably more successful.
That's right. Ultimately, our goal was around customer centricity and customer trust, and we wanted a customer to be able to trust buying from a third party at Amazon as much as they trusted buying from Amazon, the retailer. And so, because of that, we put all types of operational requirements and hooks into the integration so that we knew exactly what was going on between the third party and the customer. We drove all of the customer contact through Amazon versus eBay kind of went the other way. It's like, hey, you guys go figure it out. We really take very low level of responsibility. We gave the A to Z guarantee from the very get-go to these transactions and really stood behind it. And so I think those were some of the fundamental differences between how Amazon attacked it versus eBay. And as you note, over time, I think the Amazon, the high trust and high delivery commitments really won out for customers.
How much functionally do you think the customer really knows they're not just buying from Amazon?
I'm guessing that a vast majority don't really get that they are buying from somebody else other than Amazon. And that's I think, we messaged it abundantly, but I think at the end of the day, we also kind of hit it from an experience standpoint and from an integration standpoint. So, for example, when you order multiple items, you get one order confirmation email, right? And so, again, we wanted it to just be as much as a seamless experience in buying from multiple sellers and from buying from Amazon for a customer and to be trusted.
I read multiple articles that claim that on a lot of items, Amazon actually, through their third-party system, actually makes more money through the third-party sales than when they sell that same item themselves. Based on your experience, do you think that's accurate?
I do. I mean, when you think about kind of the all-in costs of both having to, buy it, plan it, carry the inventory and all of that versus just taking, depending upon the category, 8 to 15% rev share off the transaction and everything. Like, I think the business is very profitable, and on a lot of items, more profitable to do in a marketplace model than to be the retailer of record.
So, with the caveat that, of course, you haven't been there for several years, in your estimation, you would say that the third-party sales ends up being a huge chunk of what Amazon does at retail.
I think I've seen the estimates that, Merchants At is well over 50% of all units shipped and sold at Amazon. And a lot of analysts have commented that it's been the vast majority of the retail profit that's been generated from the retail business for Amazon.
Wow, so that's quite a revolution you bring to Amazon. How many years are you with Amazon?
Just about 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Why'd you move on from there?
A lot of different reasons, but at the end of the day, I was running this enterprise services business where we ran other large retailers' e-commerce infrastructure. I had responsibility for Target and the NBA and Toys R Us and Marks and Spencer, and my family was young at the time, and I just didn't want to be running a national and international business at the time.
Well, I have to ask because, it was in the news so much a year ago or more, this idea of that Amazon's a really tough place to work and that burnout is really, really common. Just based on your own experience, how do you feel about that impression that people have that, man, it chews people up and sometimes spits them out?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different points made in that New York Times article, and I think one is Amazon is a demanding place to work, and they say that, then they shouldn't make any apology for it, but what that brings with it is a lot of ownership and accountability and control to be able to really get things done within that environment, and it's not for everybody. And so it is a demanding place to work. I found it to be kind of one of those always-on situations and everything, and that wasn't. I thought it was great because you could actually get really cool things done in pretty efficient manner. And I never saw any of the kind of abusive scenarios that were described in that New York Times article or anything like that.
So since Amazon, essentially, you continue to do this for a living, helping companies drive process changes like you did with the Merchants At program. But you also have written a book about the lessons that you learned at Amazon called The Amazon Way, 14 Leadership Lessons Behind the World's Most Disruptive Company. So I want to talk a bit about that. But first, how did the idea for doing a book about what you learned at Amazon come about?
Yeah, so when I left Amazon, I went to work for a firm called Alvarez & Marcel, and I helped start the Western region for the consulting practice. And as I got into my client work, I just saw the impact of the little stories and anecdotes that we used at Amazon in helping my clients make change. And I had one client in particular at the Gates Foundation, and he just started talking to me about, like, man, you'd really do a nice job at taking all those anecdotes. And so I just started kind of breaking out, like, what were all those different strategies and techniques that we used. And I decided, like, okay, I think I'll write a book around this. And the real magic moment was when I figured out, like, oh, let's tell all those different stories through the framework or through the lens of the 14 leadership principles. And then it just told a really great story. And it was a pretty easy book to write.
Because as you say, these 14 leadership principles at Amazon, they're not just, some sort of empty corporate rah-rah speak. Like, everyone knows these lessons and is actually, it's a measure of people's success or failure at the company, how well they can live up to these 14 different lessons.
That's right. When I was there, they weren't actually written down. They weren't codified, but you heard about them and you saw them being used in meetings and hiring evaluation and debating how we go about something or the trade-offs of one approach versus the other and everything. And then at some point they became codified, and they truly are active leadership principles and used throughout the company. And I think that's one of the key ways that they scale mentality and scale leadership is through these leadership principles at Amazon. They're used by every team within the organization.
I wanted to pick out a couple of points that I found interesting, especially in terms of just thinking of Amazon as a company and how it behaves. um, for instance, how Amazon thinks about creating platforms, that its business is a series of platforms. So first of all, explain how Amazon thinks about that, and then I have a couple questions about it.
Sure. So platforms in Amazon's mind is where you take a core capability, you figure out how to make it self-service and scalable for internal use, but then you also ask yourself, how would I make this useful for other people to leverage this capability? And you build tools and APIs, so methods of integration, so that others can leverage that capability. And when I was at Amazon, we started to get really clear on this notion of, Amazon is really two types of companies. We're a retailer and we're a platform business. And the retailer is the big client for that platform business, but certainly not the only client for that platform business. And so Merchants At is an example of a platform business where we expose the capabilities of Amazon, let others ride on those rails. We try to do it in a very self-service, scalable manner. And that's what a platform business means at Amazon.
Right, because that's I just want to hit on this a little bit because I feel like this is important. It's a subtle distinction, but we classically think of the platform strategy as you create an ecosystem and then you allow obviously in the software case independent developers to come in and play in your ecosystem, and then you achieve success based on the scale of your platform and things like that. But that's the subtle difference is that what you're saying is that Amazon takes its own skill sets and tool sets and then finds a way that they're successful and then puts them out for others to use. So it's sort of like the stuff, but it's not like a marketplace where, you have to pay a toll. It's more you're leveraging the skill sets that Amazon is good at, and then you're allowing others to do whatever they want with them.
That's right. I mean, AWS, so the Amazon Web Services business, really came from this place of how do we create great infrastructure for the Amazon developers, and they force themselves to have make it available for external developers, because that would make it just better for the internal Amazon users for that technology. And what they found was an unbelievable business, right? And so they've just scaled that to the nth degree. But it really came from the notion of, hey, we got to build tools that are going to allow Amazon, the retailer, to scale its infrastructure.
So obviously AWS is possibly the most famous example of this, but what are some other examples of platforms at Amazon, even some that maybe didn't turn out to be successful?
Yeah, so there's a platform called Mechanical Turk, which is a tool that allows you to leverage a worldwide workforce for small incremental pieces of work to be done. There's CreateSpace, which is where I've published this book, is a platform for allowing authors to publish books and Kindle books easily. The Merchants At platform is another good example. FBA, Fulfillment by Amazon, is a classic platform where they've taken Amazon's internal fulfillment capability and fulfillment network, turned it inside out, and allow others through self-service tools and through APIs to leverage that fulfillment network and capability.
One chapter that
and my guess is that you'll see a lot of new platform businesses from Amazon. I think especially in they're launching Prime Air, which is both the airplane transport capability as well as the drone capability. And I think on the airline capability, at some point you'll see Amazon allow others to leverage that capacity to transport goods and items.
Oh, right. Hadn't thought about that. That makes perfect sense. That not only will they sort of do what FedEx and UPS does for them already, but once they have that in place, then they can offer the same services. So I see.
Absolutely.
So one chapter that I found interesting was talking about Amazon likes people to have a bias for action, that they encourage you to make educated sort of risk or bets on things.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that a little bit, and then I want to ask you about one specific example.
Sure. So I think the bias for action is just having the wisdom and the common sense that, we are going to be well informed, but we're not going to allow ourselves to have, paralysis by analysis, and that it's better to move forward in a relatively well-informed position than to try to always wait for the perfect information, because by doing something, that's actually how you're going to get feedback from the customer and from the market. And so, the bias is to know, like, when am I well enough informed to move forward and not study or admire the problem anymore.
Okay, actually, one other chapter then about being vocally self-critical.
Yeah, so that is a principle about helping leaders stay humble, and that by always looking at yourself and your teams first as like, well, what did we do and do wrong in this situation? Where did we fail? That always allows others to do the same and make it easier to be able to hold each other hold each other accountable. And so the notion is always be more self-critical of yourself, and that really gives you the permission to then pursue improvements in areas that maybe don't belong to you.
Okay, so the specific example coming after those two items is Amazon's probably most famous recent, I guess the only you have to say failure was the Fire Phone. So again, with the caveat that obviously you haven't been there for several years, but based on some of the points in the book and based on your experience, how do you feel internally Microsoft as an organization, the team that worked on the Fire Phone, how does, if I said Microsoft, I'm sorry, how does Amazon deal with something like a huge failure like the Fire Phone?
Well, Jeff Bezos was deeply involved in that project. I've read a couple of recounts of how that happened, and so all secondhand, but he was really kind of the chief product officer for that and everything. And so the only thing I could kind of say is, Bezos is on record as saying, like, I would expect more big failures, like that. And I think Amazon's really trying to create an environment where they make bets and they realize that a substantial percentage of those business bets are going to fail. They try to make them as low cost and as low impact as possible, but they're going to continue to make big bets like that.
One more great point from the book, and then we'll begin to wrap up here. It was this idea of the future press release that Amazon uses, and as a concept, as like a management concept, I found that fascinating. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the future press release is a tool that you develop early in a project to help communicate the vision for that project and put in some minor but exacting explicit statements about what that is to force the right outcomes. And so it's a press release style, but so the recipe kind of for it is that you write it not for the time of launch, but for some time after launch. So a year or so after the launch of a new service or a new capability. You start off by describing, what delighted my customers about this capability, and try to describe the great customer experience that would come out of it. And then you would try to outline what were some of the big issues and inventions and things that you had to solve for in order to achieve this success. And you wouldn't outline like how you solve for those things, because that work isn't done yet. You would just start getting in paper like, hey, here's the work in front of us. And then you would give that press release to an individual who could use that press release to drive the right actions and the right deliverables across the organization, regardless of kind of organizational structure. And so it's really a tool that allows them to delegate accountability for an important program to somebody and lets them drive change across the organization, hoping to avoid kind of bureaucracy and kind of inter-team politics.
a few more questions to wrap up with that are sort of big picture. When I'm looking as a researcher to try to figure out how Amazon thinks, and I assumed going into it that clearly they had to have been influenced by Walmart's example, being the greatest retail success story of all time. But surprisingly, at least in what I've been able to find, there don't seem to be a lot of parallels. Like, okay, we're going to replicate what Walmart did here or what Walmart did there. I'm curious, again, based on your experience. Obviously, early on, they hired some people over from Walmart, but how much does Amazon think about what Walmart created as it's creating this new retail world?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, Amazon was trying to, early on especially, be the anti-Walmart and avoid a lot of the, store infrastructure and capital expenses that were required for traditional retail. And so they were going kind of the opposite way of the big footprint retail model. I think they admired Walmart for especially the supply chain expertise that Walmart had. And so I think that they looked to them and they hired some talent, as you alluded to help them build their supply chain capabilities that Walmart was so famous for.
Another thing that, again, this was my bias going into the research, is I assumed that I couldn't believe that selling everything was really Jeff's idea from day one, but nothing that I've been able to uncover has been able to prove that. So essentially, based on your experience, do you feel like that's always been it from day one? Jeff Bezos has believed that he can be the retailer for literally everything.
I would say not only that, but Jeff, I think, has always seen beyond retail, and he always saw Amazon as a technology company first, and retail was just kind of the first manifestation and the first business model built around that technology. And so I think he's always had a very big vision about being able to sell everything, and that the catalog was an asset itself. And whether you sold it directly or not, that was valuable data and a valuable asset to have, and that Amazon was first and foremost a technology company.
Okay, so I was going to end with this one, but let me have the next question be, so when we think of like Microsoft, the one big idea was, Microsoft software on every computer, and software is the bottleneck. When we think of Google, we think of organize the world's information. Facebook is connect all the world's people into a virtual graph. What would you say is Amazon's one big idea as a company?
I don't know if they have one big one. They've had so many instrumental ones, though. For example, one of the business innovations that people don't recognize that came from Amazon was the ability to sell a used item right next to a brand new one. Like that was an early but a game-changing capability that nobody had ever done before. Like, I've got a new book and I can see the used book price for that right next to it. And so I think Amazon is much more of this 10,000 really good mid-sized ideas. And, Jeff, in I think it's his 2014 shareholders letter, talks about, he has three magical businesses and they're trying to build more. And the magical businesses, one was Marketplace, one's AWS, and one is FBA. I think those are the three. And so, it's such a conglomerate business today that I don't think it's one big idea.
Okay, so final question.
Maybe the big idea is they have always said, we are going to be the world's most customer-centric company ever. And I think that they've held to that, and they continue to espouse that. And so I think that their customer obsession is perhaps the big idea from Amazon.
Right, and that was literally the very first part of your book.
Right.
So final question would be, describe for me Jeff Bezos as a leader, and describe him as you would from a management consulting perspective, but also from a personal level. What was he like to work under as a person?
Well, I didn't report directly to Jeff, but especially for the first couple of years when we were running and launching the Merchants App, which was the the biggest bet we had going into Amazon. We had weekly update meetings, together and everything. And I'm sure that he's evolved, over time and everything. But I mean, he has, like I think so many of these great leaders has, the ability to take in, hundreds of little different data points and anecdotes and plans, and to see the one needle in the haystack that is either kind of like the golden idea between all of these, or the discrepancy, and how on earth does it get to me with this type of discrepancy and everything. And so, amazingly in tune with details, and really likes to read plans. He doesn't like so much to hear plans, but he likes to force teams and leaders to write out what your plan is. And he deeply reads and digests those, and then the conversation starts. And so I think that was one of his real leadership tactics, was forcing this notion of narratives, and we were going to write plans out, and we were going to read them as a senior team. And they spend an unbelievable amount of time doing that.
Well, the book is The Amazon Way, 14 Leadership Lessons Behind the World's Most Disruptive Company. It's by John Rossman. You can buy it, guess where? Amazon. I'll have a link to it in the show notes for this episode. If you're fascinated like I am about trying to understand Amazon, the company, this is a fantastic book. John Rossman, thanks for coming on the podcast and helping us try to understand Amazon.
Thanks for letting me contribute.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.